When most people think of December 7, 1941, they imagine the chaos of explosions, sinking battleships, and smoke filling the sky above Pearl Harbor. The attack has gone down in history as a sneak attack, a sudden strike that dragged the United States into World War II. But beneath the surface of that dramatic morning lies a far more complex story. The real reason Japan attacked Pearl Harbor was not simply a desire for destruction, but a desperate gamble shaped by economics, resources, politics, and ideology. To truly understand why Japan made this fateful choice, we need to go back decades before the bombs fell. Japan in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was not the global power we think of today. For centuries, the island nation had been isolated, closed off to the outside world. But in 1853, American warships under Commodore Matthew Perry forced Japan to open its ports. That moment sparked a national awakening. Japan's leaders realized they had two choices: adapt and modernize, or risk being colonized by Western powers. They chose modernization, and they chose it with relentless speed. Within a few decades, Japan transformed itself into an industrial and military power. It adopted Western technologies, built factories, created a modern army and navy, and embraced imperial ambitions. But there was a problem. Japan lacked the natural resources needed to sustain this new industrial might. It had little oil, almost no iron ore, and limited access to coal. To fuel its rising empire, Japan looked outward. In 1895, Japan defeated China in the First Sino-Japanese War, gaining Taiwan and a foothold on the Asian mainland. A decade later, in 1905, Japan shocked the world by defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, the first time an Asian power had beaten a European empire in modern times. From then on, Japan saw itself as destined to dominate Asia. Its leaders believed they could create a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, an empire that would stretch from Manchuria to Southeast Asia, supplying Japan with the resources it needed while freeing Asia from Western colonial powers, at least in theory. But there was a catch. Every step Japan took toward expansion brought it into conflict with the West, especially the United States. The U.S. had interests in the Pacific from the Philippines to Hawaii, and it relied heavily on trade with China. America viewed Japan's aggression with alarm. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, setting up a puppet state called Manchukuo. In 1937, it launched a full-scale invasion of China, triggering one of the bloodiest wars in history. American newspapers reported on atrocities like the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands were killed. Sympathy for China grew in the U.S., and so did hostility toward Japan. But what really set the stage for Pearl Harbor was not ideology, it was oil. By 1940, Japan imported about 80% of its oil from the United States. Without that oil, its war machine would grind to a halt. Planes couldn't fly, ships couldn't sail, and factories couldn't produce weapons. The U.S. knew this and used it as leverage. In July 1941, after Japan occupied French Indochina, President Franklin D. Roosevelt froze all Japanese assets in the United States. More importantly, the U.S. cut off oil exports to Japan. Overnight, Japan faced an existential crisis. Its reserves would last only about 2 years. Without oil, Japan could not continue its war in China. Without war in China, it could not sustain its empire. Japanese leaders debated their options. Some argued for diplomacy. Maybe they could reach a compromise with Washington. Others believed the United States would never accept Japan's dominance in Asia. To them, war was inevitable. The only question was when and how. Here's where strategy comes in. Japan knew it could not win a long war against the United States. America's industrial power was simply too great. But Japanese military planners had a different idea. If they could strike a devastating blow, destroying the U.S. Pacific Fleet in one surprise attack, America might be shocked into negotiating. Japan could then consolidate its empire, securing oil fields in the Dutch East Indies, rubber in Malaya, and other vital resources. In their minds, the gamble was clear. Strike now or face slow strangulation. This is why Pearl Harbor was chosen. Located in Hawaii, it was the heart of American power in the Pacific. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft carriers all operated from there. If Japan could cripple this fleet, it would have months, maybe years, to expand without interference. On December 7, 1941, that plan was put into action. Over 350 Japanese aircraft launched from 6 carriers, striking with precision. Battleships like the USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma were sunk. Over 2,400 Americans were killed. Japan had achieved tactical surprise. For a brief moment, it looked like their gamble had worked. But the truth is, Pearl Harbor was a strategic disaster for Japan. The attack failed to destroy America's aircraft carriers, which were out at sea that day. It also failed to hit vital oil storage tanks and repair facilities, meaning the U.S. fleet could recover faster than expected. Most importantly, instead of scaring America into peace, Pearl Harbor unified a divided nation. Overnight, the United States, which had been deeply isolationist, rallied for total war. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. And within days, America declared war on Japan, and soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on America. So why did Japan really attack Pearl Harbor? At its core, the answer is resources. Japan was an empire built on expansion, and expansion required oil. When the United States cut off that lifeline, Japan felt cornered. Its leaders believed they had no choice but to strike. But beneath that economic logic lay something deeper: pride, ambition, and a belief in destiny. Japan's militarist leaders convinced themselves that boldness could overcome America's might. History proved them wrong. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not simply a sudden act of aggression. It was the climax of decades of tension between a rising Asian empire and an established Western power. It was the desperate move of a nation trying to secure its future through war, rather than compromise. And it was a gamble that cost Japan everything. In the end, Pearl Harbor teaches us a crucial lesson. Wars are not always caused by hatred alone. Often, they are driven by resources, strategy, and fear of decline. For Japan, Pearl Harbor was supposed to be the key to survival. Instead, it opened the door to defeat.